why do you think companies are nervous about quiet quitting? And do you think that they should be nervous about this idea of quiet quitting? Or maybe it's like what we're talking about. It's less about the quiet quitting buzzword and more about the active disengagement that people should be more concerned about.
Talked to a lot of CEOs in and around this topic, and I think remote isn't necessarily helping those CEOs. I think a lot of it comes down to the fact that managing in a remote environment is not just harder, or being in a remote environment is not just harder for employees, but I think managing in that environment is much harder for managers. Even some of the older concepts of um, being a supervisor in some cases, right? If you're a remote manager, you literally cannot supervise, right? Like you're staring at a wall most of the day. So I think the old tactics and tricks that maybe would have worked when everyone showed up to an office tower, or the environment of which you were managed, you can't necessarily apply, or the average person can apply to that to a remote environment or a hybrid environment. And that lack of information when we stare at a wall sometimes as a manager, I'm sure the managers in the room know, like sometimes our jobs actually are ambiguous. Like sometimes we're like, what do I have to do today? It's not the same thing. It's not necessarily tasks moving through a funnel. And I think that lack of information of like, is this person here? Right? Is this person even at work today? Like if I call them, would they even pick up? Are they like somewhere else? I think that lack of information that was almost automatic in the office place is that void is being filled with stories.
Mhm.
And I think as human beings, we're just naturally really, really good at and err towards self-preservation stories. So like, how am I being screwed? What do I have to prepare for? What's the worst that could happen? If I don't see something, how is this going to affect me negatively? And let's prepare for those cases, because ultimately, like, that's better for our survival, right? And I think CEOs are inventing, and executive teams and managers are inventing a lot of stories based on small anecdotes of data. That one time they tried to call that engineer and they're out walking the dog. Oh, that must mean no one's working, right?
Mhm.
Then no one's working. Oh no, what are we gonna, how do we, everyone's quiet quitting and no one's getting any of their job done, no one's doing any of their work. And I think, as that happens, the word quiet quitting scrolls past their Twitter feed and they click it. And now they're completely in a fever dream around. No one's getting any work done. This is not productive. We got to get everyone back in the office. Everyone's got to show up at 9. I think there's a lot of that fear, that anxiety that's sitting inside of some people,
Mm.
based on the fact that we just don't see as much information as automatically as we used to.
Yeah. I love how you're saying, that we anchor because the brain will anchor on the things that scare us and that trigger warning signs, right? Our amygdala will go off like there's no tomorrow because it's trying to survive. And our brains also like patterns. We like because there's just too much input anyway every single day. And so we will find and create patterns out of things to make it easier for us. And it's really hard to break those patterns. And I think moving, especially to remote work, like you said, it was, oh God, I can't see. But just because you could see, did you actually, there's probably other ways you were figuring out like work was getting done. And then that's the thing is I think thinking about how do we set better boundaries? How do we work in a whole different way than we used to? I think that's really important to figure out anyway, because the way of work has just been slowly changing, throughout the years. And so I love that, like, yeah, companies are nervous, but that was the question I flipped back. I was like, okay, well, how do we know they're working? I was like, how did you know they were working when you were in the office?
That's
Like,
exactly the point,
just
right?
because you see them typing, does that mean something? Like, how are
Yeah.
we actually measuring it? Let's make sure we're clear on that, get specific on that. I think some of the comments I just saw, it's like, yeah, getting clear on expectations and roles and what we're supposed to be doing, which at the end of the day is so much more helpful, so much more engaging, I think, and really the direction we should be kind of working towards anyway,
And,
whether in
and
office or not.
exactly. And it's not like these things didn't exist prior. People would take smoke breaks or coffee breaks and they would go on a walk to grab lunch or do whatever, right? But now all of a sudden, because you you don't know, right? And I'm sure a lot of people get like a lot more engagement at work that they get to like walk their dog. That might be a much better
Yeah.
mental break than going for coffee with coworkers and talking about work more. But I think the stress response of some managers is, I'm really stressed out, I'm going to work a little bit harder. And in office, maybe they show up a little bit earlier. If they saw their whole team there, they would feel a little bit at ease. And I don't think there's as much of that release valve that's as free in remote. You don't, it's not like you can show up early one day and just be like, oh, everyone else is stressed out too. Cool. There's almost like a I don't know, something else they're doing to try to release that stress. And maybe that's clicking links on Twitter and getting worked up about quiet quitting.